On a rainy Saturday evening, I drove to the house where my son and his wife had been living rent-free for 6 years. The deed was still in my name. Before I could knock, my son stepped outside, spread both arms across the doorway, and said, "Dad, you can't come in while my wife's family is here." I stood frozen, staring at my own son, guarding the entrance to a house that legally belonged to me. Then I reached into my jacket pocket and made one call on speaker, and what came through that line drained every trace of color from their faces. "Before we go any further, thank you for being here on Silent Sweet Revenge. It means everything to me. Drop a comment right now and tell me what city or country are you watching from. I read every single one. This story, it contains fictional elements, crafted for entertainment and educational purposes. Names and places are coincidental, but every lesson inside it is something worth carrying with you." The rain came down in the kind-off thin, steady sheets that Salem gets in late July. The kind that doesn't announce itself with thunder, but just arrives and stays soaking through your jacket before you realize it's doing it. I was standing on the front porch of a house I owned on a street I had chosen, looking at my son standing in the doorway with both arms stretched out across the frame, like he was holding up the walls. "Dad," Nathan said, and his voice was tight in a way I had never heard from him before. "You are not going into that room while my wife's family is here." I looked at him for a long moment. My chest felt like something had dropped through it and kept falling. My hands stayed at my sides, perfectly still, the way they always go still when something is too big to process standing up. Then I turned around, walked back to my car, and called my attorney before it had even started the engine. But I am getting ahead of myself. Let me tell you who I am first, and then I will tell you how I ended up standing in the rain outside my own front door being told by my own son that I was not welcome inside. My name is Arthur Calloway. I am 65 years old. I spent 31 years working for the Salem Water Authority as head of maintenance and safety compliance, which means for 3 decades, my entire job was making sure that when anyone in this city turned on a faucet, what came out was exactly what it was supposed to be. I was not a man who missed things. I was not a man who let details slide. And I want you to understand that about me. Because what happened in the months before that rainy Saturday night is partly the story of a careful man who missed everything that mattered most. I retired 2 years ago with a pension, a paid-off house at 1847 Creekide Drive. And one hobby, which my wife Margaret will tell you, is finding new ways to arrange the garage without actually cleaning it. She is not wrong. Marge, to everyone who knows her, is 62 years old and spent 24 years as the head secretary at Hoover Elementary School. Did I have seen that woman calm down a panicking parent, redirect a furious principal, and talk a crying 8-year-old through a lost lunchbox all in the same 5-minute stretch without raising her voice once. She is the kind of person who makes you feel steadier just by being in the same room. She has brown eyes that go very flat when she is more angry than she is letting on. And I have learned over 38 years of marriage that the flat eyes are considerably more dangerous than the raised voice. We got married in her mother's backyard in Milwaukee when she was 24 and I was 26. Her uncle played guitar badly and her grandmother cried through the entire ceremony, and I have never once regretted a single day of it. Our son Nathan is 35. He has my jaw and Marge's stubbornness, which is a combination that served him well until it didn't. 6 years ago, Nathan married Diane Wexler, a sharp, organized woman of 33 who worked as a paralegal at a firm called Reyes and Harmon in downtown Salem. Diane was the kind of person who color-coded her calendar and remembered that Marge takes her coffee with 2 sugars and a splash of cream. She asked good questions at dinner. She brought flowers when she came to visit. Always the right kind, always fresh. When Nathan and Diane told us they wanted to open a boutique hotel, my heart swelled. In a way I am not embarrassed to admit, the Copper Harbor Inn, 18 rooms, our sturdy building in the center of Salem, the kind of place that gets written up in travel blogs and earns loyal repeat customers. I drove past it twice on my lunch break the week they signed the lease just to look at it and feel proud. 6 years ago, I also bought a second property, a smaller house at 412 Delmare Street, 10 minutes from Creekside Drive. I want to be clear about something. Nathan did not ask me for it. He never asked that I bought it because I wanted my son to have a place to start without the weight off rent eating everything he was trying to build. The deed stayed in my name. That was not an oversight. That was intentional. In my experience, generosity works better when the paperwork is clean. Frank Mosley has been my closest friend for 24 years. We met on a recreational softball team that no longer exists because most of us cannot play softball anymore. He retired from the Postal Service 4 years ago and now spends his time appearing uninvited at my house with beer and opinions about things nobody asked him about. He is 66 years old, built like a man who used to be athletic and has mostly made peace with it. And he is the only person outside of Marge who I trust completely and without condition. The life we had before all of this was good in the way that quiet lives are good. Sunday dinners, Margie's garden out back, which she tends with the focused intensity of someone running a military operation. Frank showing up on Tuesday evenings with a six-pack and some strong feelings about local road construction. Nathan calling most weeks less after he married Diane, which I told myself was just what happened when people built their own lives. I told myself a lot of things in those months that I have since had reason to consider. What I did not know, what I had no reason to suspect because I am a man who spent 31 years trusting systems to function the way they were designed, was that for the past 18 months, a plan had been taking shape inside the walls of that house I had bought for my son on Delmare Street. A plan that involved my signature, my savings, my property, and me name. I found out on a Tuesday in June at a bank I had been walking into for 14 years. But I am still getting ahead of myself. Let me start with the small things because the small things were there the whole time, and I missed every single one of them. The first sign came in February, and I almost laughed at it. Nathan called on a Sunday afternoon while I was in the garage trying to convince myself I was organizing rather than rearranging. Marge was in the kitchen doing something with a pot roast that smelled like the best decision anyone had ever made. The call came through on the old landline we still keep because Marge says cell phones are fine for information but not for actual conversation. And I have learned not to argue with her about things she has already decided. Hey, Dad. Nathan's voice was easy, relaxed, the same voice he used when he called to talk about the weather or ask how the garden was doing. Quick question. Have you and Mom ever thought about setting up a living trust? I wiped my hands on a rug and leaned against the workbench. A living trust? I said, yeah, for the houses, the savings, just estate planning stuff. A guy I know was talking about it at the hotel, and it got me thinking. People your age should have that sorted out. My jaw tightened slightly at people your age, but I let it pass. Nathan had always been careless with phrasing. We've got wills, I said. Done years ago. Simple ones, but they cover everything. Sure, he said. But wills go through probate, Dad. A trust is cleaner. Diane was actually mentioning it. She says she sees it all the time at the firm. Families that don't plan ahead end up in court for years. I'll think about it, I told him. Just something to consider, he said, and his voice stayed warm and easy right up until he said goodbye. I set the phone down and went back to the garage. I did not think about it again for 3 months. That is the truth, and I am not proud of it. Frank came by that same evening with a six-pack of Dashites and strong opinions about the new traffic light on Commercial Street. We sat on the back porch while Marge brought out a plate of crackers and cheese she claimed was for both of us, but was mostly for Frank because she has always had a soft spot for him that she expresses through food. You hear from Nathan lately? Frank asked, pulling the tab on his beer. Duck called this afternoon, actually. Frank nodded slowly. Good. He went quiet there for a while. 3 weeks, maybe 4, without checking in. He paused. I don't mean to make something out of nothing. You're not, I said. He's busy. The hotel keeps them both running. Frank looked at Me over the top of his can with the expression he uses when he disagrees with something, but has decided not to say so directly. With Frank, that expression lasts about 45 seconds before he says it anyway. This time, he just drank his beer. I should have paid more attention to that 45 seconds. In early March, a woman from a title company called the house. She identified herself, pleasantly mentioned a company name I didn't recognize, and asked if we were still confirmed for our appointment on the 14th. I think you have the wrong number, I told her. Is this the Callaway Residential Creekide Drive? My stomach shifted just slightly the way it does when something small doesn't add up. It is, I said, but we haven't made any appointments with a title company. There was a brief pause on her end. I apologize, she said. I'll check our records and follow up. She never called back. That I told Marge about it over dinner, and she set her fork down and looked at me with those brown eyes that had gone just slightly flat. That's strange, she said. Probably a clerical error, I said. Wrong Callaway, Arthur. She said my name the way she does when she wants me to slow down and actually think. We are the only Callaways in Creekide Drive. I'll keep an eye on it, I said. I did not keep an eye on it, that is also the truth. April brought the mail trouble. Not dramatic, not all at once, just a gradual thinning of the envelopes in our mailbox. The catalogs kept coming. The grocery circulars, the charity solicitations, the occasional card from Margie's cousin in Wisconsin. All of it arrived on schedule. But the bank statements, the quarterly investment summary, and notice from the insurance company, those started disappearing. One here, one there, the kind of absence you rationalize before you even realize you're doing it. Did we get anything from Columbia Pacific this month? Marge asked one morning, standing at the kitchen counter going through the mail with the focused attention she gives to everything. Must be running late, I said. She made a sound that was not quite agreement and not quite argument, somewhere in between, which in 38 years I have learned to translate. As I hear you saying that, Andy, want you to know I am not convinced. Then came the afternoon in mid-April that I have replayed more times than I can count. I had driven over to 412 Delmare to drop off a spare set of keys. Nathan had asked to borrow something about a locksmith and a storage unit. I don't remember exactly. I parked in the driveway and came around the side of the house toward the back door. The kitchen window was open and the screen door was latched. And before I had gotten close enough to knock, I heard Diane's voice coming through clearly. She was on the phone. Her back was to the window, and she hadn't heard me come around the side of the house. Her voice was low and tight in a way I had never heard from her before. The voice of someone who is exhausted, straight through to the center of herself. That I just need 6 more months, she was saying. That's all. I have a plan and it's going to work. Nobody is losing anything on my watch. Do you understand me? Nobody. A pause while the other person spoke. I know what I'm doing, she said sharper this time. Just trust me and give me the 6 months. I stood there on the side of that house, with the spare keys in my hand, and felt a wave of something that I can only describe now as misplaced sympathy. My chest ached for her. The hotel was struggling, that I knew that in the vague way, things that people are trying to protect you from. And here was this woman, my son's wife, fighting for it with everything she had. I knocked on the back door frame. She turned around, saw me, and the exhaustion on her face shifted so quickly into a bright smile that I almost missed the shift entirely. Arthur, she said warmly. I didn't hear you come up. Just dropping these off, I said, holding up the keys. Cerrito interrupt. You're never an interruption, she said, and she hugged me briefly at the back door the way she always did, and smelled like the expensive hand lotion she kept on the kitchen counter. I drove home feeling sorry for her and thinking about nothing in particular. That I know now what 6 more months meant. I know exactly whose money that plan was going to run on. And I know that the exhaustion in her voice was not the exhaustion of someone trying to save something she loved. It was the exhaustion of someone trying to finish something she had already started. But that afternoon in April, I just drove home. The camera above our side gate went dark for the first time 2 days later. 20 minutes, maybe a little more, just long enough for something to happen and not long enough for me to notice until much later that I told myself it was a power flicker. It had spent 31 years trusting systems to work the way they were designed. The problem I understand now is that I had forgotten to account for the people who study systems specifically in order to know which parts to break. June arrived the way Oregon Junes always do. Cool mornings, afternoons that can't decide between sun and cloud, and the smell of cut grass coming through every open window that I had been meaning to add Marge's Namito a certificate of deposit at Columbia Pacific Bank for the better part of ire, and I finally ran out of reasons to put it off. It was a Tuesday. I wore my good jacket because Marge always says I dress like a man who has given up when I don't, and I have no desire to prove her right. Carol Brennan had managed our branch on Lancaster Avenue for 14 years. She was a precise, warm woman who remembered that I took my coffee black and that Marge preferred the lobby chairs near the window. When she pulled up our account and her expression shifted just slightly, just for a moment, I felt the same small wrongness I had felt back in March when a title company called. Error, she said carefully. Before we add Margaret to the CD, I want to ask you something. She turned her monitor toward me. Are you aware of this document on file? I leaned forward. The screen showed a power of attorney, a legal document that under Oregon law grants another person full authority to make financial and property decisions on your behalf as binding, as if you had signed every transaction yourself. The name listed as attorney in fact was Diane Wexler Calloway. My mouth went dry. I never signed this, I said. My voice came out steadier than I felt, which surprised me. I didn't think so, Carol said quietly. The signature passed our initial review, but when I look at it now, next to your actual file signature, she pointed to the screen. The curve on the capital A, it's close, but it's not right. She was correct. I had signed me name approximately 10,000 times over 31 years of maintenance reports, safety certifications, and compliance documents. I knew every angle of those letters the way I knew the sound of a pipe under pressure. The A on that document curved left where mine curved right. It was close enough to fool a quick glance. It was not close enough to fool me. There's also a notary stamp, Carol said Sharon Meeks. I flagged it. Last week, when Diane came in asking about your savings balance, we couldn't give her information. And she wasn't listed as authorized on those accounts, but then I found this in the system. My stomach dropped straight through the floor. Diane had come in. She had tried to access my savings. She had been turned away. And somehow a power of attorney bearing my forged signature had already been filed with this bank. I need a copy of that document, I said. Carol printed it without another word. She also printed the filing date, March 14th. Margie's birthday, the evening we had spent at her favorite restaurant on the river, celebrating with salmon and the good wine she only allows on special occasions. Diane had known we would be out. She had planned around us. I thanked Carol, shook her hand, and walked to my car. I sat behind the wheel with the printed pages on the passenger seat and pressed both palms flat against my thighs because my hands had started doing something I refused to let them finish. I was not going to fall apart in a bank parking lot. I was going to drive to the Marion County Recorder Office and pull every document filed under my name because that is what a man does when the system he trusted for 31 years starts telling him something is very wrong. I started the engine. The recorder's office was 8 minutes away. It felt like the longest 8 minutes of my life. The Marion County Recorder's office smells like old paper and floor cleaner, and the particular kind of institutional quiet that makes every sound you make feel too loud. I walked in with the bank printout folded in my jacket pocket and asked the clerk at the front desk to pull every document filed under my name in the past 18 months. She typed. She waited. She looked at her screen for a moment longer than necessary. Sir, there are 2 filings, she said. The power of attorney from March and a property transfer request on a Delmare Street address. She paused. The transfer hasn't been recorded yet. It's in a pending folder, My throat tightened so fast it felt like a fist closing around it from the inside. I need copies of both, I said, everything. I sat in the waiting area and read the transfer document 3 times. It was 4 pages long, clean and professional, the kind of paperwork that would pass a casual inspection without a second glance. The property listed was 412 Delmare Street. My property, the house I had bought in 2019 and placed in my own name and given to my son to live in because I wanted him to have a start without the weight of rent dragging him under. The transfer was waiting on the POA to clear once the power of attorney was accepted as valid. Diane would have the legal authority to sign the deed transfer on my behalf, moving the title of that house out of my name and into someone else without me ever touching a pen. I sat with that knowledge for a long moment, turning it over the way you turn over a piece of pipe that doesn't look right, checking every angle. Then I walked to my car, sat down, and called Frank. He picked up on the second ring the way he always does, which is one of the things I have never taken for granted about Frank Mosley. Arthur, just my name, but something in his voice shifted the moment he heard mine. Frank, I said, I think Diane has been trying to steal my house. The silence on his end lasted exactly 3 seconds. Then say that again slower. It told him everything. The POA, the forged signature, the deed transfer sitting in a pending folder at the recorder's office, waiting for the paperwork to clear so it could erase my name from a property I had owned for 6 years that I told him about March 14th, Margie's birthday, the dinner on the river, the way Diane had built her timeline around the one evening she knew we would not be home. Frank's breathing changed as it talked. By the time I finished, it had gone slow and deliberate the way it does when he is working very hard not to say the first thing that comes to his mind. He said finally, his voice rough around the edges. Does Nathan know about any of this? The question hit me somewhere below the sternum and just stayed there aching. That I don't know, I said. Frank exhaled hard. That's the part that's going to hurt worse than the money. You know that, right? My eyes burned. Not enough to spill over. I was still sitting in a parking lot in broad daylight, and I had not cried in a public parking lot since 1987, and I was not going to start now. But they burned, and I pressed the heel of my hand against the steering wheel and stared at the roof of my car until the burning eased. I know, I said. What are you going to do? I'm going to find an attorney, I said, and then I'm going to go home and figure out how to tell Marge without scaring her to death. Frank made a sound that was not quite a laugh and not quite a sob. Something cracked open in the middle. You want me to come over? Not yet, I said. Let me talk to Marge first. That I started the engine. The printed pages sat on the passenger seat edges, perfectly straight, as though they were not the most destructive thing I had ever brought home. That night I made 2 phone calls. The first was to Marge. The second was to Patricia Okafor. Patricia Okafor's office was on the 3rd floor of a building on Court Street that smelled like good coffee and earned money. Her assistant showed me in without making me wait, which I later learned was not standard procedure. Bouta courtesy extended to people Carol Brennan called ahead for personally. Pat Okafor was 53 years old, broad-shouldered, and had the kind of stillness about her that you usually only see in people who have spent decades in rooms where the wrong word costs someone everything. She shook my hand, gestured to the chair across from her desk, and read the documents I had brought without saying a single word for 4 full minutes. Then she set them down and looked at me. The notary stamp is fraudulent, she said. There is no Sharon Meeks registered as a notary public in the state of Oregon. I checked before you arrived. She folded her hands on the desk. But here is what makes this more serious than a simple forgery. Arthur Sharon Meeks is not a made-up name. I felt the hair rise on the back of my neck. What do you mean? Sharon Meeks is the maiden name of Diane's mother, Pat said, her voice steady and precise as a scalpel. Her legal name now is Sharon Keene. Your daughter-in-law used her own mother's former name to create a fraudulent notary stamp. And based on what I'm seeing here, Sharon Keene signed the notary log herself using a name she legally held for 30 years to make this document pass a basic verification check. My stomach turned. Over-hard. I gripped the armrest of the chair and forced myself to breathe evenly. Oh, this wasn't just Diane, I said. No, Pat said. This was a family decision under Oregon law. What Sharon Keene did constitutes notary impersonation, a criminal offense separate from the forgery itself. We are looking at conspiracy charges that extend beyond your daughter-in-law. She laid out her plan in 4 steps, filing an emergency revocation of the POA with the county to freeze any pending property transfer, subpoenaing records from Reyes and Harmon to trace the notary stamp materials, preparing a civil complaint for fraud and forgery, and referring the matter to the Oregon State Bar given Diane's paralegal certification. I need you to do something difficult, Pat said. And for the first time, something almost warm crossed her face. I need you to be completely boring for 6 weeks. Do not change your locks. Do not confront Nathan or Diane. Do not alter your routine in any way. If they suspect we're moving against them, evidence disappears. People disappear. She looked at me steadily. Can you do that? I spent 31 years making sure nothing showed on the surface while I fixed what was broken underneath. I said, I can do boring. The corner of her mouth moved. Good. I was almost in my car when my cell phone rang. The number was local but unfamiliar. Mr. Calloway, a woman's voice orchestral. My name is Evelyn Marsh. I live at 1849 Creekide, next door to you. Did a pause. I think I have something you need to see. Evelyn Marsh was 71 years old, with sharp eyes and a security camera system her nephew had installed after a neighborhood break-in 2 years prior. She met me at her front door holding a USB drive and looking like a woman who had been working up to this conversation for some time. I've seen your son at your mailbox, she said, her voice tight with the discomfort of delivering bad news to a neighbor she liked multiple times. It hot you'd asked him to collect your mail, but then I saw a story on the news last month about deed fraud and mail theft, and I went back through my camera storage. She pressed the USB into my hand. The camera keeps 90 days. I saved everything I found. I drove home and watched the footage on my laptop at the kitchen table. Nathan, in the gray jacket he wore on weekends, using a key to open the side gate, reaching up to the camera cable and disconnecting it with the practiced ease of someone who had done it before. Opening the mailbox, removing envelopes, not all of them, just certain ones, the ones that mattered, replacing them with grocery circulars, reconnecting the cable, and walking back to his car. My son had done this. I pressed both hands flat on the table and stared at the paused image on the screen until my eyes ached, and my throat felt like it was full off gravel. When Marge came into the kitchen 20 minutes later and saw my face, she pulled out the chair beside me and sat down without being asked. Tell me everything, she said. All of it right now. I told Marge everything that I told her about the POA and the forged signature and the deed transfer waiting in a pending folder at the recorder's office. I told her about Sharon Keene signing her daughter's fraudulent notary log with a name she had legally carried for 30 years. I told her about Evelyn's camera footage, our son in his gray weekend jacket cutting the cable and taking the mail, and walking back to his car like it was an errand he had simply added to his Saturday afternoon. Marge sat across from me at the kitchen table and listened without interrupting once. Her hands were folded in front of her, perfectly still, and her face was doing that thing it does when she is processing something too large for a normal expression, a kind of careful blankness that I have learned over 38 years to read as the outermost wall of something much more turbulent underneath. When I finished, she said nothing for exactly 4 seconds. Then she stood up, walked to the hallway, and said, "Come with me." She opened our bedroom closet and pulled the small fireproof safe from the shelf where it had lived for 11 years. Her hands moved through the combination with the muscle memory of someone who had opened it 1,000 times. The door swung open. Marge reached in and lifted out the ring box. She opened at it. Then she made a sound I had never heard from her before in 38 years of marriage. A short, sharp intake of breath, like something had struck her in the chest without warning, followed immediately by a sob that she tried to stop and couldn't. Her hand came up to cover her mouth, and her shoulders shook and the ring box trembled in her other hand. The ring inside was wrong. I could see it from where I stood. The stone caught the light differently. Too bright, too uniform. The cold sparkle of cubic zirconia, where there should have been the warmer, deeper fire off her mother's diamond. She was here, Marge said, her voice breaking apart in the middle of the sentence, Andre assembling itself with visible effort. She was in this room. She hugged me and said she loved being here. And Marge stopped, pressed her lips together. Hard. Her eyes were streaming now, tears running down both sides of her face. And she did not wipe them, just stood there, holding the ring box with both hands, like she was afraid of what she might doif. She put it down. My mother wore that ring for 41 years. Arthur. I crossed the room and put my arms around her. She leaned into me and cried. Not quietly. Not the restrained kind of crying she allows herself in difficult moments, but the deep-wrenching kind that comes from a place below pride, below composure, below everything she normally keeps tightly held. Her whole body shook against mine, and it held her tighter and stared at the wall above the safe, and felt something cold and solid settle in my chest, like concrete curing. It took several minutes. When she finally pulled back, her face was red and her eyes were swollen, and she looked at me with an expression I can only describe as grief, with its sleeves rolled up. What do Wedo? She asked. Pat is already working in it. I said she'll trace the ring. Good. Marge wiped her face with the back off her hand, one firm swipe, like closing a door. Then let her work. Pat called 2 days later. She had traced the ring to a jewelry resale shop called Burnside and Sons on the east side of Salem. The person who sold it had worn a wig and dark glasses and signed a false name, a competent disguise by most standards. But the shop's parking lot camera had captured the vehicle clearly. Pat's voice over the phone was flat and precise. It was Diane's car, Arthur. The plate is a match. I sat down on the edge of the bed and pressed one hand over my eyes. The sale price was $4,200, Pat continued. I traced that money through the hotel's utility records. It was used to pay the final electric and water bill for the Copper Harbor, keeping the lights on just long enough to maintain the appearance that the hotel was still operating. My mother-in-law's diamond ring sold for $4,000 to keep a dead hotel looking alive, so that I would keep believing the lie. Arthur, Pat said carefully. Are you still there? I'm here, I said. My voice came out rough and low, scraped clean of everything except the words themselves. Keep going. Tell me everything you have. She did. And what she told me next made the ring feel like the smallest thing they had taken. What Pat told me next took 11 minutes to say, and approximately 11 seconds to understand. The Copper Harbor Boutique Inn had not been operating since February. It had been shut down by the Oregon Department of Revenue and the Salem Fire Marshal's office, simultaneously unpaid business taxes dating back 14 months, combined with 3 unresolved fire safety violations that the hotel had been cited for and never corrected. The license to operate had been suspended. The building was technically closed. Nathan and Diane had known this since the day the letters arrived. They have been maintaining the appearance of an operating business, Pat said, her voice carrying the particular flatness of someone delivering information that disgusts them professionally. Every morning they dress for work, drivetto the building, unlock the front door, and turn on the lobby lights. They sit in the office for several hours. Then they leave. I press the phone harder against my ear. Who's in the rooms? 2 individuals we've identified as acquaintances of Nathan's. They check in, take photographs in the lobby and the breakfast area, and post them to the hotel's Instagram account with backdated timestamps. The comments underneath are from accounts Diane created. Pat paused. Arthur, every positive review the hotel has received in the past 5 months has been written by your daughter-in-law talking to herself. Something twisted in my chest so sharply that I actually pressed my free hand against my sternum, certain for a moment that I had felt something physically moved. I thought about the champagne point 6 years ago, standing in that lobby on opening night with Nathan beside me and Diane laughing at something Frank had said, and the pride I had felt. The enormous, uncomplicated pride off watching her child build something real that I had driven past this building twice on my lunch break just to look at it. The building was empty. It had been empty for 5 months. And every morning my son put on a suit and drove to a hollow shell and sat inside it so that I would keep believing he was building something. Frank called the following morning before I'd finished my first cup of coffee. Arthur. His voice was strange. Careful in a way Frank's voice almost never is. I just drove past the Copper Harbor. Nathan's there. He's in that blue blazer he wears unlocking the front door. A short pause. He looks completely normal. My throat tightened. I know Frank. You know, Pat told me last night. The hotel's been closed since February. The sound Frank made was not a word. It was a sound a man makes when something he was hoping wasn't true turns out to be exactly as true as he feared. Low, rough, expelled from somewhere deep. Frank, I said, don't drive past again. Don't stop. Don't call Nathan. 6 weeks, I said. Pat needs 6 weeks. Can you give me 6 weeks? A long breath. Yeah, he said finally, his voice thick. Yeah, I can do that. That afternoon, Pat sent me a screenshot. The Copper Harbor's Instagram page. A photograph of people having breakfast in the hotel dining room, sunlight coming through the windows. Coffee cups and pastries arranged just so. The caption read, "Another beautiful morning at the Copper Harbor. We love our guests." Posted according to the timestamp 3 days ago. I recognized the angle immediately. I had sat at the table in that photograph on opening night 6 years ago. The chair in the left corner still had the small scratch in the back leg from when Frank knock-headed over making a toast. I zoomed in on the photograph until it filled my screen. The pastries were the same ones from the opening night photos. The coffee cups were the same. The light coming through the window was the same angle because it was the same photograph taken 6 years ago, filtered and cropped and posted as though it had happened last Tuesday. I set my phone down on the kitchen table and stared at the ceiling for a long time. Dad. I whispered it out loud to no one, to the empty kitchen, to the version of my son it had believed in until approximately 72 hours ago. What did you do? Pat called again that evening. Arthur, I need you to come in tomorrow morning. I found 2 sets of property transfer documents, and when you see what they were planning to do with both houses, everything else is going to start making sense in a way that is going to be very difficult to hear. I told her I would bet here at 8. Then I sat with Marge in the kitchen until midnight. She made Decafand put a cup in front of me without asking and sat down across the table. She talked for a while about her garden. Clear's throat. The roses along the back fence that were finally starting to fill. And after 3 summers, the way the soil had been too dry this year, that I listened, not because the garden mattered right now, but because the sound of her voice talking about something ordinary was the only thing that made the kitchen feel like our kitchen, and not a room where terrible things had recently been understood. I was in Pat's office at 8. The next morning with coffee, I had Matt eat home because I needed something to dow with my hands on the drive over. Pat did not waste time on pleasantries. She opened a folder and slid a document across the desk toward me before I had fully settled into the chair. Frank found this at an asset recovery lot on the south side of Salem. She said, "It's a loan document on a 2019 pickup truck. The vehicle was repossessed 6 weeks ago for non-payment." I looked at the document under the line marked guarantor. My name was typed in clean black letters. Arthur James Calloway. Below that, for 12 Delmare Street was listed as the confirming asset. My coffee cup came down on the desk. Harder than I intended. Did I never sign this? I said. No, Pat said. But someone practiced your signature long enough to get it past the loan officer's initial review. The identification used to support the application was taken from tax documents. Documents Nathan had access to because he helped you file 2 years ago when your regular accountant was recovering from surgery. I thought about that afternoon. Nathan had sat at our kitchen table with the paperwork spread out in front of him, asking questions about deductions. writing things down, being helpful in the careful, organized way that I had attributed to Diane's influence on him. He had made copies of everything. I had thanked him. My stomach rolled over hard and I pressed my lips together and breathed through my nose until it passed. Where did the money go? I asked. Into a sports betting account, Pat said. Registered to a man named Tommy Briggs. He's 38, a friend of Nathan's from college. When I spoke with him earlier this week, he was genuinely distressed. She paused. He believed the money was a shared investment in the hotel. Nathan told him the funds were coming from a family business account and that they would split any returns. Tommy didn't ask further questions because he was behind on his own rent and needed the arrangement to be legitimate. So Nathan used my identitito to take out a loan, funneled the money through a friend who thought it was an investment, and the friend had no idea that I said correct. Tommy Briggs has agreed to provide full cooperation and his complete account records. Pat's expression did not change, but something behind her eyes went very still. There is one more thing in this file, Arthur. I want you to be prepared before you read it. She slid a second page across the desk. It was a section of the loan application, the part where Nathan had described the nature of the guarantor relationship. I read it once, then I read it again because I needed to be certain I had understood it correctly. Under the heading, Reason for Third-Party Guarantor, Nathan had written, my father serves in a financial guardian capacity due to early indications of cognitive decline. He has authorized this arrangement verbally, but requires assistance managing formal documentation. The room did not spin. I want to be clear about that. The room did not spin, and I did not feel faint. And I did not make a sound. What happened was quieter and worse than any of those things. Something in my chest simply stopped for a moment, like a clock that has been running for 65 years and suddenly finds itself without reason to continue and then started again, slower, heavier, with a different quality to every beat. My son had written that sentence, not Diane. Nathan had written those words about me and put his name underneath them. Cognitive decline. 31 years of making sure the city's water was safe to drink. 31 years off technical reports and safety certifications and compliance audits that required a level of precision that most people would find exhausting. Amy's son had written cognitive decline in a legal document and signed his name to it. I set the page down. I pressed both palms flat on Pat's desk, flat and still, the way my hands always go when something is too large to hold. Arthur. Pat's voice was careful, measured. The voice of a woman who has delivered devastating information before and knows that the right thing to do afterward is simply to present. Take whatever time you need. I'm fine, I said. My voice came out steady. I was not fine, but I was functional, which in that moment was sufficient. Nathan will need to account for every piece of this. Pat said the forged signature on the loan, the identification documents, the mail he intercepted taking mail from a federal mailbox is a federal offense under United States Code Title 18, Section 1708. That charge alone carries up to 5 years. I nodded. I picked at my coffee. I drank it. What's next? I asked. Pat almost smiled. Next one? She said, I show you the 2 property transfer documents, and then you're going to understand exactly how large this was designed to be. I had thought the loan was the worst off it. I had thought sitting in that chair, with my palms flat on her desk, that I had reached the bottom of what they had built against me. I was wrong by a considerable distance. Pat opened the second folder with the same calm efficiency she brought to everything, and I found myself grateful for it. Grateful that the person sitting across from me was not rattled, not horrified, not performing sympathy. She was working in that moment. Watching her work was the only thing keeping me level. 2 sets of property transfer documents, she said, placing them side by side on the desk. Prepared, but not yet filed. Both require the power of attorney to be accepted as valid before they can move forward. The PA revocation we filed last week stopped both of them cold. She tapped the first set. This one targets 1847 Creekide Drive, your primary residence. The stated basis for the transfer is that Arthur Calloway has demonstrated an inability to manage his own financial affairs due to progressive cognitive impairment, and that Nathan Calloway, as next of kin, is assuming management responsibility. She looked up at me. The document references 3 family members who are prepared to provide written statements confirming your memory difficulties. Diane began laying that groundwork with Nathan's extended family approximately 4 months ago. The coffee in my stomach turned to something cold and heavy 4 months ago, while Diane was bringing flowers to Sunday dinners and asking about Marge's garden, and remembering that I liked Mystique medium rare. She had been quietly building a case that I was losing my mind. The second document, Pat continued tapping the other set, uses 412 Delmare Street as collateral for a private lending agreement. Diane signed it in her capacity as your attorney, in fact, under the fraudulent POA. The lender is a private company, not a bank, which is why there was no federal verification process. She paused. The agreement includes a debt assignment clause. If the underlying debt is not repaid within 90 days, both properties can be drawn into the dispute. Arthur, both houses, not one, both. I put my coffee down, because my hand had developed a faint tremor that I refused to acknowledge, but also did not trust around a full cup. There is one more item, Pat said. Her voice dropped slightly, not much, just enough for me to notice. I want you to understand that I am telling you this because you need to know it, not because I want to cause you additional distress. Tell me, I said. She opened a third document. Diane used the fraudulent power of attorney to execute a life insurance policy in your name. The coverage amount is significant. Nathan is listed as sole beneficiary. Premiums have been paid from the hotel's operating account for the past 4 months. She set the page down and looked at me directly. This policy was not taken out to protect your family's financial future, Arthur. It was taken out as a contingency. If the plan to acquire the properties encountered complications, if the stress of the situation affected your health, Nathan would still receive a substantial payout. The chair underneath me felt very far away from the floor. I gripped the armrests and breathed through it, in through the nose, out through the mouth. The way I used to breathe through confined space inspections in utility tunnels when the walls felt too close. They had planned for me to get sick. They had prepared financially for the possibility that what they were doing to me might break something in my body that could not be fixed. Arthur. Pat's voice was firm and grounding. I need you to stay with me. There is one more thing, and it is important. I nodded. My throat had closed to approximately the width of a drinking straw, but I nodded. She slid a printed email across the desk. This was recovered from Reyes and Harmon's server during the subpoena process. Diane sent it to her father, Gerald Wexler, from her work account. I read it. Dad waned 3 more weeks. He still doesn't suspect anything. Sharon's piece is done. The second transfer document is ready. Keep Mom calm and tell her it will be over soon. 3 weeks. The email was dated 2 days after Diane had come to our house to help Marge reorganize the bedroom closet. 2 days after she had stood in our hallway and hugged my wife and said she loved being part of our family. Something broke open in my chest. Not the quiet stopping from earlier, not the cold heaviness, but something hot and raw and furious that I had to clamp down on immediately because Patricia Okapor's office was not the place. And this was not the moment. How long? I asked. My voice came out rough and scraped. How long had they been planning this? Based on the earliest communications ever covered, Pat said carefully. At least 18 months, possibly longer. She folded her hands. This was not a desperate response to the hotel's failure, Arthur. The hotel's failure may have accelerated the timeline, but this plan existed before the hotel closed. It existed while the hotel was still running. They were building toward this regardless. I sat with that for a long moment. 18 months. Nathan had sat at my kitchen table filing my taxes and making notes while this plan was already underway. Diane had remembered Marge's coffee order and brought the right flowers and said all the right things while an 18-month clock was already running. What do I do now? I asked. Pat almost smiled. Not warmly, but with the particular satisfaction of someone who has been waiting to answer exactly this question. Now, she said, you go home and have dinner with your wife. You act normally for 2 more weeks while I finish preparing everything, and then on a Saturday evening of our choosing, you drive to 412 Delmare Street and you give Nathan one last opportunity to tell the truth. She looked at me steadily. I'll handle everything else. I drove home. Marge was in the kitchen when I walked in. Flour on her hands. Something in the oven that smelled like the specific kind of comfort only a person who loves you can produce on a day when you need it most. She took one look at my face and turned off the oven timer. Sit down, she said, that I'll make tea. And then you are going to tell me everything that woman said. Every single word. And we're going to figure out what comes next together. I sat down. My hands were steadier than they had been in Pat's office. Something about Margie's voice, the absolute, unshakable certainty in it did that tone every time. 2 weeks later, on a Saturday evening in late July, it rained. Before I tell you what happened at that dinner table, what Diane did in front of her own parents and a room full of guests right to my face, drop a still here in the comments so I know you are with me, because what comes next is the kind of thing that will make your blood run cold. A quick note, this story contains fictional elements woven in for storytelling and educational purposes. Some details may not reflect any single real event. If that is not the kind of content you're looking for, no hard feelings at all, you can step away right now. But if you stay, I promise it is worth it. The dinner invitation came 4 days before the Saturday it rained. Diane called Marge directly, which she rarely did, and her voice on the phone was warm and bright and completely ordinary. The voice of a daughter-in-law who simply wanted to have the family together before the summer got away from them. Her parents were visiting from out of town, she said. A few old friends of the hotel were coming by. Nothing formal, just dinner at the house on Delmare 7:00. Bring nothing. Marge held the phone against her chest after she hung up and looked at me across the kitchen. We're going, I said before she could ask. I know, she said. I just wanted to look at you for a second first. We drove over together on a Tuesday evening in the 5th week of our 6-week agreement with Pat, close enough to the end that I could feel the weight of what was coming and far enough from it that I still had to hold everything exactly where it was. The house on Delmare looked the way it always did from the outside, warm light in the windows. Nathan's car in the driveway, the small potted rosemary by the front step that Marge had given Thema as a housewarming gift 6 years ago, and that had somehow survived despite neither of them having any interest in gardening. Inside, the dining room table had been set with the good dishes. Gerald Wexler, Diane's father, a broad, ruddy-faced man of 61, with the handshake of someone who had spent decades believing firmness conveyed authority, stood near the kitchen doorway with a glass of wine, and greeted me with the particular warmth of a man performing warmth rather than feeling it. His wife, Sharon, 58, careful eyes, the kind of woman who smiled without letting the smile reach anywhere above her cheekbones, kissed Marge on the cheek and said how wonderful she looked. 2 men I recognized vaguely as former hotel investors sat at the far end of the table, deep in conversation. They nodded at me when I came in. I nodded back. The first hour was unremarkable. Good food, easy conversation. Diane refilling glasses before they were empty. Nathan talking about a hiking trail he had been meaning to try. I ate my dinner and answered questions and told a story about Frank that made the table laugh and watched Diane from the corner of my eye, the way I used to monitor pressure gauges during routine inspections, not with alarm, just with attention. Then Diane asked me to pass the bread basket. Arthur, she said pleasantly, could you pass the bread? I passed it. 40 seconds later, Arthur, would you like more wine? I said, no, thank you. 90 seconds after that, she tilted her head toward the investors and said in the tone of someone sharing a gentle, affectionate observation, you know, I asked Arthur about the bread just a moment ago, and he's already forgotten. We worry about him sometimes, don't we, Nathan? Nathan smiled, a careful, practiced smile that did not reach his eyes. Dad's been a little scattered lately, he said. It happens. At a certain point, you just have to let the younger generation take the wheel. The table offered the polite, uncomfortable laughter of people who did not know what else to do. My jaw tightened so hard I felt it in my back teeth. Under the table, Margot's hand found mine and pressed not gently, not reassuringly, but with a firm, deliberate pressure of someone communicating something specific. Hold on, hold on, hold on. I held on. Diane produced the folder after dessert, while the table was still relaxed and warm with food and wine. She set it in front of me with the casual ease of someone producing a grocery list. Arthur, I almost forgot. Could you sign these? It's just to confirm you received the gift card we sent for your birthday. Bureaucratic stuff. You know how the firm gets. I opened the folder. The top page was innocuous. A simple acknowledgement form, one-line sign at the bottom, exactly what she had described. I turned the page. The third sheet was not an acknowledgement form. It was a property management authorization, ALGAL document granting Nathan Calloway full authority to manage, lease, refinance, or sell any real property held in the name of Arthur James Calloway, effective. Immediately upon signature, it had been slipped between two blank pages with the practiced precision of someone who had done this before or planned it very carefully. I closed the folder. I'll need to have my attorney review this before I sign anything, I said. My voice came out level and pleasant, the voice of a man making a reasonable request at a dinner table, and I watched something flicker behind Diane's eyes, quick and voluntary. There and gone. Nathan's chair scraped back hard. He raked across the table and pulled the folder from in front of me with enough force that the wine glasses shuddered. Dad. His voice had an edge I had never heard from him before. Sharp and embarrassed, and something underneath both of those things that I did not have a name for yet. You are embarrassing this family in front of our guests. It's a birthday form. Just sign the birthday form. Gerald Wexler set his wine glass down and nodded slowly, as though Nathan had said something wise. Sharon Keene looked at the centerpiece, and I looked at my son, this 35-year-old man who had once crawled into my lap during thunderstorms, who I had taught to ride a bike in the parking lot of Hoover Elementary on a Sunday morning when nobody else was there, who I had driven to college with a truck full of second-hand furniture and a check I could not entirely afford. And I felt something split open in my chest that was not anger and not grief, but some precise and terrible combination of both that I had no word for and did not want one. Margot's hand tightened on mine. Under the table. One firm squeeze. Then she picked up her water glass and took a composed sip and said very calmly to the woman sitting across from her, Sharon, did you make it down to the coast while you were visiting? Sharon Keene blinked. Oh yes, we went to Lincoln City on Sunday. Lovely. Marge, said the outlet stores. They're just wonderful. And that was how my wife diffused a dining room fool-off tension while I sat beside her and got my breathing back under control. We left at 9:15 in the car. I did not speak for 4 blocks. Then I said, Marge, I know. She said, that document. I know, Arthur. Nathan, I know. Her voice broke on the second word, just slightly, just for a moment, like a single crack in very strong glass. Then it sealed itself back up. I know, but tonight we go home. Tomorrow we call Pat. I drove. The rain had started sometime during dessert and was coming down steadily now, turning the streetlights into long orange smears on the wet asphalt. At home, I called Pat at 10:00 and told her what had happened. She listened to everything without interrupting. When I finished, she said, Good. They just made our case considerably stronger. Get some sleep, Arthur. Saturday is almost here. Diane called Thursday morning. 2 days before the Saturday it rained. Her voice was warm again. The reset was always remarkable, the way she could take whatever had happened at a dinner table and simply set it aside like a dish that had been cleared. She said she was sorry about Tuesday evening. that things had gotten tense when they didn't need to, that she hoped Arthur and Marge knew how much she and Nathan valued them. I said, "Of course." Then she mentioned almost as an afterthought that the water pressure in the hotel's basement had been behaving strangely, a possible leak somewhere in the utility lines. She knew it was a lot to ask, but given my background, 31 years of exactly this kind of problem, she wondered if I might come by and take a look before they called a plumber. Save everyone the expense. I said I would come by that afternoon. I called Pat immediately. After I hung up, she picked up before the second ring. She called, I said. I expected she would, Pat said. After Tuesday, Shens to re-establish control. Go. Be cooperative. Be calm. Whatever happens in that building, do not raise your voice and do not leave quickly. Walk out slowly when you are ready. A brief pause. And Arthur checked the water system from outside before you go in. I drove to the Copper Harbor at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Before I went inside, I walked the perimeter of the building the way I had walked the perimeter of every facility I had ever inspected methodically, unhurried eyes on the foundation and the utility access points. The external pressure gauge on the east wall read normal. The drainage lines showed no evidence of moisture stress. There was no leak. There had never been a leak. I had known that before I left the house. Inside the lobby, lights were on, and the reception desk was staffed by a young man I recognized as one of the people who had appeared in the hotel's Instagram photographs. He nodded at me with a slightly glazed expression of someone who had been asked to be somewhere without being told exactly why. Diane was in the small conference room off the main hallway, seated at the head of the table with Gerald Wexler on her left, and two men I recognized as creditors, men who had lent money to the Copper Harbor and had not yet been repaid, arranged down one side. Sharon Keene sat near the window with her hands folded in her lap. Nathan was standing near the door. Diane looked up when I walked in and smiled the way she always smiled. Bright, controlled the smile of a woman who had decided in advance how this was going to go. "Arthur," she said warmly. "Thank you, Samik, for coming. We were just having a quick catch-up with some of the hotel's partners." She reached under the table and produced a folded bundle of clothing. Dark work pants, a canvas utility shirt, the kind-off thing I had worn for 3 decades in maintenance tunnels and utility rooms. She held it out across the table toward me. "The leak is in the basement, 3rd corridor near the east wall. Given your experience, I thought you might want Tobe comfortable." The room was very quiet. I looked at the clothing in her outstretched hand. I looked at the creditors, watching from their side of the table, clearly uncertain what they were witnessing. That I looked at Gerald Wexler, who was examining his cufflinks with great interest. I looked at Nathan, who was looking at the wall 6 in above my head. Then I looked at Diane. "Thank you," I said pleasantly. I took the bundle from her hands and set it on the table in front of me slowly and without drama, the way you set down a tool you have finished using. Before I head down, I should mention I walked the exterior before I came in, checked the pressure gauge on the east wall, and inspected the drainage access points on the north and south foundations. I kept my voice conversational, the voice of one professional speaking to another. "There's no leak, Diane. The system is running exactly the way it should." The smile on her face did something complicated. It did not disappear. She was too controlled for that. But it contracted, pulled inward like a sail when the wind drops. "Well," she said, "perhaps it resolved itself. These things sometimes they do." I agreed pleasantly. I picked up the bundle of clothing and handed it back to her across the table. "I'll leave these with you in case the plumber needs them." I pushed my chair back, stood up, nodded to the room in general, and walked out. I did not hurry. I walked through the lobby at the same pace I had walked in past the young man at the reception desk, who was now staring openly out through the front door and down the 2 steps to the sidewalk and to my car. I sat behind the wheel and allowed myself exactly 30 seconds to feel the thing I had not allowed myself to feel in that room. A shaking in my hands that started at my fingertips and worked its way up to my elbows before I pressed both palms, flattened the steering wheel, and breathed it
down.
I had been calm. I had been correct. And I had walked out of that building with exactly the dignity I had walked in with. What I did not know, what Frank told me 4 hours later when he called with a voice like gravel in a tin, was that someone in that room had been recording. Arthur, Frank said, and he could hear that he was working hard to keep his voice level and failing at it. Somebody just sent me a video. It's you in that conference room. It looks like you shoved something across the table and walked out angry. His breath came out sharp. It's been edited, man. I can see it's been edited. But it's Arthur there saying you lost control. My jaw tightened until my back teeth ached. I thought about the moment I had set the bundle of clothing on the table. The ordinary, unremarkable motion of placing an object down on a surface. On camera, isolated from context, cut to begin at exactly the right frame, it could be made to look like almost anything. Savate, I said. Do not delete it, and do not respond to whoever sent it. Save the message. Save the video. Save everything. Already done, Frank said. His voice dropped lower, rougher.
Error.
These people. I know, I said. What theory trying to do to you? I know, Frank. My voice came out steady and quiet and absolutely certain. 2 more days. There was a long breath on his end. Then 2 more days, he said, and I could hear in those 3-word everything Frank Mosley had never been able to say out loud. The fury, the loyalty, the particular anguish off watching someone you love be targeted and having to stand still while the clock runs down. We came home from Margie's afternoon appointment on Friday, find a stranger sitting on our front
porch.
She was a woman in her mid-40s, professionally dressed with a clipboard in her knees and the carefully neutral expression of someone trained to deliver difficult news without triggering a scene. She stood when she saw us coming up the front walk and introduced herself as a placement coordinator from Willamette Valley Senior Care, a residential facility on the north side of Salem. Mrs. Calloway, she said, looking between us. I have you down for a 2 o'clock consultation. I know I'm a little early. I hope that's all right. Marge's hand tightened on my arm so fast and so hard that I felt it in the bone. I'm sorry, Marge said, and her voice was perfectly, terrifyingly controlled. Could you tell me who scheduled this appointment? The woman checked her clipboard. The booking was made by a Diane Wexler.
Calloway.
She indicated that you and your husband had decided to explore residential options and wanted to get. The process started before the end of summer. She looked up with a practiced, compassionate smile. She mentioned it had been a difficult conversation, but that you were both feeling ready for the transition. The silence that followed lasted approximately 4 seconds. In those 4 seconds, I watched my wife's face do something I had only seen it do twice before in 38 years. A total momentary collapse of composure, like a structure that has been holding weight for too long, suddenly registering what it has been carrying. Her chin dropped, her eyes filled. Her breath came in sharp and audible, the sound of someone who has just been hit somewhere they did not expect. Then she straightened, squared her shoulders, lifted her chin back to exactly the angle it is always at. Thank you for coming, Marge said to the woman, her voice smooth and even a freshly poured surface. There's been a misunderstanding. We did not schedule this appointment, and we will not be needing your services. I'm sorry you made the trip. The woman blinked. Of course. I'm so sorry for the confusion. Please, Marge said, gently gesturing toward the front walk. Have a safe drive. The woman left. Marge stood on the porch until the car was out of the driveway, and then she turned and pushed open the front door and walked inside, and I followed her and closed the door behind us. Diane had used Nathan's spare key, the same one we had given him years ago. The same one he had used at our mailbox in those Saturday mornings Evelyn's camera had recorded. Pat had told me not to change the locks, that I had followed that instruction. I understood now exactly what it had cost. The boxes were in the living room, 6 of them, cardboard uniform, the kind you get from a moving company. They were stacked neatly against the far wall, each one labeled in black marker in handwriting that was not Marg's and not mine. Dad and Mom's bedroom. Dad and Mom's study. Kitchen keepsakes. One box in the corner had a strip of blue painter's tape across the top with 3 words written on it. Piano range sale. Marge walked to that box. She stood in front of it for a long moment, her back to me, her hands at her sides. The piano had been in our family for 38 years. Marge's mother had played it every Sunday morning until her hands gave out at 81, and then she had given it to Marge, and Marge had played it every Sunday morning, since hymns mostly, sometimes other things, always in the early light before the rest of the house was awake. It was not a valuable instrument by any measure that could be put into numbers. It was irreplaceable by any measure that mattered. She was in his house, Marge said.
Her voice was
very quiet and very precise, the way it gets when she is feeling something enormous and is managing it one word at a time. She walked through our front door. She went through our rooms. A breath. She put a for sale sticker on my mother's piano. Then Marge turned around and her face was streaming, tears running freely down both sides. Her expression, not crumpled or defeated, but furious, fiercely and completely furious. The face of a woman who has been patient for a very long time and has now run all the way to the end of it. Arthur, she said, and her voice cracked. On my name like a branch underweight. I want this to be over. I need this to be over. Tell me it's almost over. Across the room and put both arms around her, and she pressed her face against my shoulder and cried the way she had cried the night of the ring. Deep and wrenching and entirely unlike her. The kind of crying that comes from a place she never lets anyone see. Her fingers gripped the back of my jacket and held on. Tomorrow night, I said into her hair. It's tomorrow night, Marge. I promise. She pulled back after a moment and wiped her face with both hands. 2 hard swipes, and her eyes were red and swollen, and she looked at me with an expression that was half grief and half something harder and colder than grief.
Good, she said.
I called Frank.
He
arrived 22 minutes later with coffee he had made at his own house and carried over in a thermos because Frank Mosley has never once in 24 years shown up at a difficult moment without something practical in his hands. He took one look at the boxes and one look at Marge and set the thermos on the kitchen counter and said, I'm staying until this is sorted. Marge said, I know you are, Frank.
Sit down.
We sat at the kitchen table, the 3 of us, and drank coffee, and did not talk about the boxes or the piano or the woman with the clipboard because some things do not need to be discussed to be understood, and sometimes the most useful thing 3 people can do is simply remain in the same room together while the clock moves toward the moment when something is going to change. Pat called at 9 that evening. Arthur, she said the banks lagged a new withdrawal request 40 minutes ago. Same fraudulent POA. They're holding it. The account has been flagged since June, and nothing gets through without my authorization. But they submitted it, which means they are out of patience. Her voice was steady and very certain. Tomorrow night. We will move tomorrow night. I hung up the phone and looked at Marge and Frank across the kitchen table. Neither of them asked what Pat had said. They had both heard enough of my end of the conversation to know. Frank poured the last of the coffee into 3 cups and pushed 2 of them across the table. Outside, the first drops of rain had begun to fall on Creek-Eye Drive, thin and quiet, the kind that doesn't announce itself, but simply arrives and stays. Before I tell you what happened that Saturday night in the rain, before I tell you what my son said when he blocked that doorway, what Diane said when her mask finally came off, and what I had been carrying in my jacket pocket the entire time, type ready in the comments. I need to know you are still here with me because this next part changed everything. No portions off this story include fictional elements, added for dramatic and educational purposes. Details may not reflect any one specific event. If this type of storytelling isn't for you, this is a good moment to step away. For everyone staying, let's finish this together. The rain was still falling on Saturday evening when I backed out of the Creek-Eye driveway at 6:45. Marge stood in the doorway and watched him go. She did not wave. She did not smile. She looked at me the way she has looked at me at every significant moment in 38 years of marriage, steadily, completely, without flinching, and I looked back at her until the curve of the street took her out of sight. I had the recording device in my inside jacket pocket. I had charged it the night before and tested the audio quality in the kitchen that morning, while Marge made breakfast and pretended not to notice what I was doing. Under Oregon law, only one party to a conversation needs to consent to its recording. I was that party. Everything said to me tonight would be mine to
keep.
Frank's truck was parked on the corner of Delmare and Whitmore, half a block from the house, engine off, lights off. I pulled alongside him and rolled down my window. "You good?" he said. "I'm good." He nodded once. His jaw was tight, and his eyes were doing something I had not seen them do since the year his mother died. A particular quality of focused restraint, like a man holding Avery heavy door closed with his shoulder. "I'll be right here," he said. The whole time. "I know," I said. "Thank you, Frank." He made a sound that was not quite words and not quite not words. Somewhere in between. And I rolled the window up and drove the half block to 412 Delmare and parked in front of the house that still had my name on Theed. The porch light was on. Through the front window, I could see movement. The warm, ordinary shapes of people at a dinner table, the kind of scene that from the outside looks like nothing, except a family spending a Saturday evening together. I walked up the front path. The rain was thin and cold and had soaked through my jacket by the time I raked the porch steps. I had just raised my hand to knock when the front door opened and Nathan stepped out and pulled it closed behind him. He looked at me for exactly 1 second. Then he spread both arms across the doorframe, left hand on one side, right hand in the other, his body filling the opening the way a man fills a doorway when he has decided nothing is coming through it.
"Dad," he said.
His voice was low and strained, the voice of someone trying to contain something too large for the space available. "You are not going into that room while me wife's family is here." I stood in the rain and looked at my son. I thought about the morning I taught him to ride abicycle in the Hoover Elementary parking
lot.
How he had crashed twice and cried once and gotten back on without being asked. And how I had felt watching that. The particular pride of seeing your child choose to be braver than they feel, that I thought about the birthday cards I had written him every year for 35 years, sitting at the kitchen table with Marge's coffee going cold beside me. Because I always spent too long on the words cards he had used to practice forging my name. Both of those things were true at the same time. That was what nobody tells you about this kind off trail. It does not erase what came before it. It just sits beside it, and you have Tokari both. "Nathan," I said, and my voice came out steady and quiet, the voice I used for 31 years in rooms where the wrong tone caused more damage than the problem itself. "This house is still in my name. You have been a guest here for 6 years. I would like you to step aside." His arms stayed where they were. "The paperwork is changing," he said. "You know that.
And
from now on, if you want to come here, you call ahead. That's how it's going to be, Dad." I reached into my jacket pocket and took out my phone. I found Carol Brennan's number and called it on speaker holding the phone between us so Nathan could hear both sides clearly. Carol picked up on the second ring.
She
had been waiting for my call. "Arthur," she said, "I wanted to let you know 40 minutes ago a withdrawal request for nearly your entire savings balance was submitted to the bank using the power of attorney on file. Given the fraud flag on your account since June, the transaction has been held and will not process, but I thought you should know. It was attempted." Nathan's face went the color of old concrete. The arms still stretched across the doorframe, but something had gone out of them. The certainty, the practiced firmness replaced by something closer to the expression of a man watching a structure he built on bad ground begin to show cracks. "Thank you, Carol," I said. I ended the call and put the phone away. "They tried to empty my savings account tonight. Nathan, with a power of attorney that carries my forged signature. That's not," he stopped. Started again. "That's not what it was." "Then tell me what it was." He looked at me for a long moment, and His throat moved, and his eyes went bright with something that was not quite tears and not quite anger, but had elements of both. Then the door behind him opened and Diane stepped out onto a porch. She was drying her hands on a dish towel, the same gesture I had seen her make 100 times at Sunday dinners. And for one disorienting instant, she looked exactly like the woman I had thought she was for 6 years, composed, warm, capable. Then her eyes found mine, and the warmth dropped away like a coat sliding off a hook. "Arthur," she said, and her voice had gone. Flat and precise, stripped of everything ornamental. "Whatever this is, let's not do it on the
porch."
"I've been doing it on the porch since you filed that power of attorney in March," I said. "I think the porch is
fine."
She looked at Nathan, something passed between them. Not a word, not a gesture, just the specific quality of two people who have had a contingency conversation and are now in the contingency. Nathan's shoulders dropped slightly. He lowered his arms from the doorframe. "Dad," Nathan said, and his voice had changed again. Quieter now, something cracked and raw underneath the surface, the voice of a man who has been holding a story together for 18 months and can't feel it starting to come apart at the seams. "The signature, I practiced it. I want you to know that." He pressed his lips together hard. His chin trembled once before he controlled it. "That I practiced it for 6 months. I used the birthday cards, the ones you wrote. I used those to learn your handwriting." The air went out of me. Not dramatically, not visibly, just a quiet internal deflation, like a tire losing pressure slowly in the cold .35 birthday cards. I could picture them, the careful sentences, the bad jokes I recycled every few years, hoping he had forgotten. The way I always wrote his name at the top in larger letters than necessary, because something about writing my son's name made me want to take up space would hit. He had held those cards up to a light and traced my handwriting until he could reproduce it well enough to steal from me. "Nathan," I said, and my voice came out rougher than I intended, scraped and uneven at the edges. "I did not come here tonight because I want to fight with you. I came here because I wanted to give you the chance to tell the truth yourself." That I looked at him steadily. My son, this man I had loved for 35 years without condition or qualification. You justice that chance. Behind him, through the front window, I could see the shapes of Gerald and Sharon Wexler moving at dinner table. And then I saw something else. 3 sets of luggage stacked neatly at the foot of the stairs, packed and ready, going somewhere. 3 suitcases packed and standing at the base of the stairs like they had been there for hours, waiting for a signal. I looked at them through the front window for long enough that Diane noticed where my eyes had gone. Something shifted in her posture. A micro-adjustment barely visible. The kind of movement that in 31 years of watching systems under pressure I had learned to recognize as the moment before a failure mode activates. "Arthur," she said, her voice still flat and controlled. "Those are my parents' bags. They're heading back to Portland tomorrow morning. Did I ask that right?" I said.
It was not a
question. And she knew it was not a question. Gerald Wexler appeared in the doorway behind Nathan, filling the frame with the particular solidity of a man who has decided he is no longer going to wait in the background. He was 61 years old and had the bearing of someone accustomed to being the largest presence in a room. Tonight, that bearing had a specific quality to it, the confidence of a man who believes the outcome of this evening has already been determined. "Arthur," Gerald said, his voice carrying the warm, measured tone of someone performing reasonless. "That I think what everyone here wants is our solution that works for the whole
family.
Diane and Nathan have been carrying an enormous weight. The hotel, the finances, it's been brutal. You have 2 paid-off properties and a pension. You are comfortable. They are not." He spread his hands in a gesture of elegant simplicity. "Surely there is a version of this that doesn't have to adversarial."
"Gerald," I
said, and I kept my voice entirely pleasant. "Your daughter filed a forged power of attorney with my county recorder's office in March. She used it to attempt to transfer my property and access my savings accounts. That is not a family disagreement. That is a series of felonies." Gerald's jaw tightened. Verisonalness in his expression did not disappear. Men like Gerald do not allow expressions to disappear, but it calcified, turned from warmth into something harder underneath the same surface. Diane stepped forward. The dish towel
Was gone.
Her hands were at her sides and her chin was up. And she looked at me with the expression of someone who has decided that if the performance is over, she may as well be herself. Miprance put $240,000 into that hotel, she said. And her voice had an edge to it now, like a blade that has stopped pretending to be a butter knife. $240,000, that is gone. That house on Delmershould belonged to them. They earned a return on what they invested, and you are standing in the way of it. Diane, I said your parents invested in a business. Businesses carry risk. That isn't my responsibility, and it does not give anyone a claim on my property. You watched Nathan go under, she said, and her voice climbed slightly. A crack appearing in the controlled surface. You watched your own son drowning, and you did nothing. If you had helped from the beginning, if you had just helped, none of this would have happened. None of what would have happened? I asked. None of the forged signatures, none of the fraudulent notary stamps, none of the stolen mail. I kept my voice level. Those did not happen because I failed to
Help Diane.
Those happened because you chose to do them. She reached into the pocket of her jacket and produced a document folded once crease sharp. The kind of fold that means it has been carried and handled and prepared. She held it out toward me. Since we're being direct, she said, you should know about this.
I
took it, unfolded it. It was the life insurance policy. The one Pat had told me about in her office. Arthur James Calloway insured. Nathan Calloway's sole beneficiary coverage amount in 7 figures. Premium payments sourced from the Copper Harbor operating account. At your age, Diane said, and her voice had gone very quiet and very precise, the voice of a woman who has calculated exactly how far she can go. Carrying this much stress is genuinely dangerous. If something happened to you, and I am not saying it would, I am saying if at least Nathan would not be left with nothing. We were trying to protect him. We were trying to protect the family. The paper in my hands felt very light for something that weighed so much.
I
looked at Nathan.
He was not looking at Diane. He was not looking at me.
He was looking at the insurance document in my hands with an expression I had never seen on his face before. A specific dawning horror, the expression of a man who is understanding something for the first time that he should have understood long ago. Nathan, I said quietly. He looked up. Look through the window, I said. At the bags. He turned. He looked through the front window at the 3 suitcases standing at the base of the stairs. Then slowly he walked to the window and pressed his face close to the glass and looked at the luggage tags. I watched his shoulders change. It happened the way structural failures happen. Not all at once, but in a sequence, one thing giving way and then the next, until the whole shape of him was different from what it had been 30 seconds before. He turned back to Diane. His voice came out stripped of everything except the single syllable. Diane, it was not an accusation.
It was
not a question. It was the sound of Amon saying a name and meaning tell me I am wrong. Diane's expression flickered. Just once. Just for a moment. The control she had maintained for 18 months showed its first real crack. Not remorse, not guilt, but the specific discomfort of being seen by someone who trusted you in a way they should not have. Your Tacitus being handled separately. She said there was a complication with your name in the booking system. It's being sorted. Whose names are on those tags? Nathan said, his voice was shaking now, not with anger, not yet, but with the particular tremor of a man whose body has understood something before his mind has fully caught up. Diane, whose name's airy on those tags. She did not answer immediately. And in the space of that delay, 2 seconds, maybe 3, Nathan got his answer. His face did something I will carry with me for the rest of my life. It did not crumple. It did no trudge. It simply went still in the way that faces go still when something fundamental and load-bearing has given way beneath them, and the person is standing on what remains, trying to determine whether it will hold. Sharon Keene appeared in the doorway. Her face was pale, and her hands were pressed together in front of her. And she looked at her daughter with an expression that contained, if I read it correctly, the specific anguish of a woman who knew this moment was coming and had told herself it would not feel as bad as
this.
It felt as bad as this. Gerald put his hand on his wife's shoulder. Neither of them spoke. I didn't come here tonight to take anything from you, I said. I was speaking to Nathan now on Lido Nathan, because this moment belonged to him more than it belonged to anyone else on this porch. I came here to give you one last chance to tell the truth. You took that chance that I looked at my son, this man I had loved for 35 years. This man who had used my birthday cards to steal my name. This man who is now standing in the rain, beginning to understand what the woman beside him had actually been building while he thought they were building it together. I need you to step aside now, Nathan. Nathan stepped aside. I reached into the inside pocket of my jacket and took out the device I had carried for 31 years in the utility tunnel and maintenance corridors of the Salem Water Authority. A compact digital recorder no larger than a thick pen designed to detect sound anomalies in pressurized water lines. I had switched it on in the Creekside driveway before I backed out. Everything said on this porch tonight had been captured with perfect clarity. Diane looked at it, and for the first time in 18 months of careful, systematic planning, she had no prepared response. Diane moved first. She took one step forward and reached for the recorder with both hands, her fingers closing around it with the speed of someone who has been waiting for exactly this moment and has already calculated exactly what to do in it. Her grip was firm and certain, and she pulled. I stepped to the left. Not quickly, just a single unhurried step, the way you step around a puddle on a sidewalk. The recorder stayed in my hand. She stared at me. Oregon is a one-party consent state, I said, keeping my voice conversational. The voice of a man explaining something straightforward to Simeon who already knows it. Only one person in a conversation needs to agree to its recording. I agreed. Everything said on this porch tonight is mine too. Used it. I held the recorder up briefly, then put it back in my pocket.
Diane, you have a
paralegal certification from the Oregon State Bar. You know exactly what that means. The color in her face shifted. Not pale, not red, but something in between, the specific coloration of someone whose professional knowledge has just been used against them in a context they did not anticipate. You set this up, she said.
Her voice had
dropped to something low and stripped down the way a voice sounds when the performance layers have been removed one by one until only the core is left. You planned this? Yes, I said. I did. How long?
6 weeks.
I said you had 18 months. I had 6 weeks. You had legal training and a firm's resources and 18 months of preparation. I looked at her steadily. This woman who had remembered Marge's coffee order and brought the right flowers and said all the right things for 6 years. I had 31 years of making sure systems catch exactly what they're designed to catch. It turns out that's enough. Nathan Medea's sound.it was not a word. It was something raw. Then a word, something that came from a place below language. Short, broken exhalation that contained in it every version of the last 18 months collapsing simultaneously. He pressed the heel of his hand against his forehead and his shoulders shook once hard like a man who has been struck and is trying not to go down. Nathan.
I turned to my son.
My voice went quieter, not softer, quieter, which is different. I did not come here tonight to ambush
you.
I came here because I wanted to give you the chance to step forward and tell the truth yourself before this went any further. You had that chance. You told me about the birthday cards. I paused. That took something. I want you to know I heard it. He looked up at me. His eyes were wet and his jaw was working. And he looked in that moment exactly like the 8-year-old boy who had crashed his bicycle in the Hoover Elementary parking lot and was trying to decide whether to cry or get back on. Except this time, there was no bicycle to get back on. There was only the porch, and the rain and everything he had done and everything it had cost. Dad. His voice broke cleanly in two right at the middle of that single syllable. Has stopped, tried again.
I don't know how to
Not tonight, I said. Tonight is not the night for that conversation, but there will be a night for it. I'm going to make sure there is. Gerald stepped forward from the doorway. His voice had lost the warmth entirely now. What remained was something flatter and harder. The voice a man uses when he has decided that negotiation has failed and he needs to establish a new position quickly. You have a recording, Gerald said. That does not mean Gerald. I said his name the way I used to say the name of a malfunctioning system, not with anger, not with drama, just with the flat certainty of someone who has already identified the problem and is now in the process of correcting it. I have a recording. I have 6 weeks of evidence prepared by one of the most effective fraud litigation attorneys in Salem. I have your daughter's notary stamp traced to a kit ordered in her name. I have security camera footage of your son-in-law taking mail from my federal mailbox. Did I have the subpoenaed records from Reyes and Harmon? I have the email your daughter sent you from her work account telling you she needed 3 more weeks. Because I still did not suspect anything, did I let that land? I have everything, Gerald. I have had everything for 2 weeks. Tonight was not an ambush. Tonight was a courtesy. Gerald's mouth opened. Nothing came out. He closed it. Sharon Keene sat down on the front step without being asked and put her face in her hands. Her shoulders were shaking, and the sounds coming from her were not composed and not controlled. They were the sounds of a woman who has arrived at the end of something she knew was wrong from the beginning and has finally run out of the energy required to pretend otherwise. I looked at the end of the street. Frank's truck had moved. It was parked now at the base of the Delmare driveway, and Frank was standing beside it in the rain, his jacket dark with water, his hands in his pockets. He had not come up the walk. He had not announced himself. He was simply there, the way Frank had always been, simply there for 24 years, at every moment that required it. Our eyes met across the wet distance of the front yard. I nodded once. Frank nodded back. Then he reached into his jacket and took out his phone and made the call. We had arranged 3 days earlier. 30 seconds passed. The rain came down. Nathan stood on the porch with his hand still pressed against his forehead and his eyes on the middle distance. The expression of a man doing a kind of internal accounting that is going to take considerably longer than 30 seconds to complete. Diane stood very still with her arms crossed over her chest, not in defiance now, but in the posture of someone cold, someone who has been standing in one place for too long and does not know where else to go. Then the headlights appeared at the end of Delmare Street. 2 cars moving at the unhurried, deliberate pace of people who are not in a hurry because they have already done all the preparation that hurrying requires. The first car parked at the curb. The second pulled into the driveway. Patricia Okafor stepped out of the second car. She was wearing her work coat and carrying a leather folder, and she moved across the wet driveway with the brisk efficiency of a woman who has been waiting 6 weeks for this particular Saturday evening and is not inclined to prolong it unnecessarily. She walked up to where I was standing and looked at me and said 3 words. "We're good, Arthur." Those were the 3 words I had been waiting 6 weeks to hear. They came out quiet and certain and complete the way the right words always do when they are said by the right person at the right moment. And I felt something release in my chest, not dramatically, not with any particular fanfare, just a slow, quiet unclenching like a fist that has been closed for a very long time finally being allowed to open. Detective Ray Solis got out of the first car. He was 44 years old, medium height, with the careful, unhurried manner of an investigator who has seen enough to know that urgency is usually counterproductive. He walked up the porch steps and introduced himself to the room in general, and produced the search warrant with the same matter-of-fact quality with which a plumber produces a wrench.
"Good evening," he said.
"I have a warrant to search these premises for documents, materials, and items related to an ongoing fraud investigation, and I'm going to need everyone to step inside, please." Diane looked at the warrant. Then she looked at me, and for the first time since I had known her for the first time in 6 years of Sunday dinners and birthday flowers and remembered coffee orders, Diane Wexler Calloway looked at me without anything prepared behind her eyes, no warmth, no calculation, no contingency, just a woman standing in the rain at the end of 18 months of careful construction, watching it come down. I stepped aside and let Detective Solis
do his job.
That was what I had spent 31 years learning how to do. Build the system correctly, put the right people in the right positions, and then step aside and let it work. The search took 2 hours and 14 minutes.
I know the exact
duration because I sat in Pat's car in the Delmare driveway for all of it, and at some point I checked my watch when the rain picked up and checked it again when it eased off, and the difference was 2 hours and 14 minutes. Pat sat in the driver's seat beside me with a thermos of coffee she produced from the back seat with the matter-of-fact preparedness of a woman who had done this before and knew it was going to take a while. She poured me a cup without asking. Talk me through what they're looking for, I said. Detective Solis has 6 categories on the warrant, Pat said. Fraudulent documents, the notary stamps, the POA templates, any additional prepared transfer materials, financial records, account information, wire transfer confirmations, the lending agreement, the ring, if it's still on the premises, travel documents, electronic devices, and anything consistent with preparation or to leave the state or country. Through the front window of the house, I could see figures moving. Solis' team methodical and unhurried. The way professional searches are conducted when there is no time pressure because the warrant covers everything you need and you simply have find it. Gerald and Sharon were seated in the living room under the watch of one of Solis' team members. Nathan was on the porch steps. Diane had been directed to the kitchen where a second investigator sat across from her at the table. She had not said a word since the warrant was read. She'll be trying to think through what they can find, Pat said, following my eyes. The problem for her is that she prepared very thoroughly. Thorough people leave thorough records. The first significant find came 40 minutes in. One of Solis's team members appeared at the front door and said something to the detective that made him straighten slightly. The controlled professional version of a reaction that in anyone less practiced would have been considerably more visible. He went inside. 3 minutes later, he came back out to the porch and held up an evidence bag containing a small wooden box that I recognized from the bedroom description Pat had given me weeks earlier. Marge's ring. The real one, still in its original setting, wrapped in a square of velvet, sitting in a box inside the drawer of a nightstand in the guest bedroom of the house I owned on Delmare Street. Diane had not managed to sell it back yet, or she had been keeping it. I did not know which, and I found sitting in that car that I did not want to know. I looked at the evidence bag for a long moment, and then I looked
away.
The second significant find came an hour in, and this one brought Pat fully upright in her seat. Solis appeared at the car window and knocked twice. Pat rolled it down. He held up a second evidence bag containing a small leather notebook, dark green, the kind sold in office supply stores worn at the corners from handling. Your client will want to see this, he said to Pat. He opened the bag and held the notebook toward the window. The writing is coded abbreviation symbols, what looks like a custom shorthand that will need a specialist to I can read.
It,
Pat said. Solis looked at her. Paralegal shorthand. Pat said it's not a standard system.
She modified it, but
the underlying structure is from a court reporting methodology I've seen used at Reyes and Harmon. Give me 10 minutes with it tomorrow morning and I'll have a full translation. Solis nodded and sealed the bag.
There's more inside, he said.
I'll update you when we've completed the inventory. He went back in.
Pat turned to me.
Her expression was the closest thing to satisfied I had ever seen on her face. Not triumphant, not pleased with herself, just the specific quiet satisfaction of a professional who has prepared for every contingency and is watching the preparation pay off exactly as designed. The notebook, I said. What does it mean? It means Pat said that Diane documented her own plan. Not completely, she's too careful for that. But coded notes about timelines, about the properties, about who needed to do what by when. A court can establish what those notes mean with expert testimony. She picked up her coffee. It also means she was confident enough in her own system that she kept records. That tells you something about how long this had been running and how certain she was that it would succeed. I thought about the email. He still doesn't suspect anything. 18 months of certainty. 18 months of Sunday dinners and birthday flowers and remembered coffee orders. And underneath all of it, a green leather notebook with coded entries about my property and my savings and the timelines required to take them. There's something else, Pat said. Solus found travel documents, 3 sets, Gerald, Sharon, and Diane. International destination tickets dated for tonight. The flight was at 11:45. 11:45 if the withdrawal had gone through, if plan had worked, if I had not gone to the bank on a Tuesday in June to add Marge's name to a certificate of deposit, they would have been gone before midnight. I pressed my palm flat against my knee and breathed through it the way I had breathed through difficult things for 65 years, steadily, evenly, one breath at a time. Nathan's name, I said. Was it on any of the travel documents? Pat looked at me, and oh, she said. It was not. We sat with that for a moment. Outside. Nathan was still on the porch steps. He had not moved in 40 minutes. He was sitting with his elbows on his knees, and his head down, his jacket soaked through the rain, falling on him at the same steady rate it was falling on everything else. He looked like a man who had sat down because his legs stopped working and had not yet determined whether they would start again. I opened the car door. Pat said, Arthur, I'm not going to confront him. I said, I'm not going to forgive him either. I stop. He's sitting in the rain. I walked across the wet driveway and up the porch steps and stood beside my son. He looked up when he heard my footsteps, and his face was a complicated wreckage. Red eyes, wet cheeks that were partly rain and partly not rain, the expression of a man who has run out of the energy required to maintain any particular expression at all. I did not sit down beside him. I did not put my hand on his shoulder. I stood there for exactly 5 seconds, long enough for him to know I had chosen to stop. And then I said the only thing I had to say. There's going to be a process now. I said legal, formal, long. At the end of it, if you want to talk, I will talk. I looked at him steadily. That is not a promise of anything except that the door is not closed. Do you understand me? Nathan's throat moved. His eyes filled completely and spilled over, and he pressed his lips together so hard they went white at the edges. Then he nodded. One single nod, tight and controlled, and carrying in it everything could not yet put into words. I walked back to Pat's car. Sharon Keene's voice came through the front window as I reached the driveway, high and raw and completely undone, the sound of a woman trying to explain something to Detective Solus that she had been telling herself for months, ways plainable. Gerald's voice came beneath hers, lower, controlled, still trying. Inside the house, Solus' team was completing the inventory. Outside, the rain came down on Delmare Street the way it always comes down in Salem in late July, steadily, without drama. The kind of rain that does not announce itself, but simply does what it came to do and keeps doing it until it is finished. Before I got back into the car, Detective Solus came to the driveway and spoke quietly to Pat. Diane, Gerald, and Sharon had been formally detained and would be transported to the station for processing. Nathan had been told he was free to leave but was asked to remain available and cooperative. Solus delivered this information the way he delivered everything, without drama, without ceremony, as though it were simply the next step in a process that had been moving in this direction for some time. I got back into Pat's car, and she handed me my coffee, and neither of us said anything for a while, which was exactly the right amount of nothing to say. The months after that moved the way these things do, slowly at first, then all at once. But before the months came, the morning after, Pat called me at 7:45 on Sunday and asked me to come to her office before 9. I told Marge where I was going, and she handed me a travel mug of coffee and said, "Call me when you know something, not call me if something's wrong," when Marge has always understood the difference. At the station the previous night, Diane had made her choice quickly. She had asked for an attorney within the first 4 minutes of the interview and had spent the remainder off it making one argument with considerable consistency. Everything that had been done by Nathan. Nathan had practiced the signature. Nathan had taken the mail. Nathan had pressured her into preparing the documents, threatening to report an irregularity in her paralegal certification examination if she refused help. She had been a participant under duress. She said, "Not an architect." Pat set the interview summary on her desk and looked at me. "Will it work?" I asked.
"No," Pat said simply.
The notebook is hers. The email to Gerald is hers sent from her work account. The secret account is hers. Opened under a company name she created. Nathan's fingerprints are on the mail theft and the signature. Diane's fingerprints are on everything else, including the planning. She folded her hands. She prepared a very thorough case against herself while trying to prepare a case against her family. Nathan, for his part, had done something unexpected. He had not asked for an attorney immediately. He had sat across from Detective Solis and talked for 2 hours, and what he said had been by Pat's account the most useful 2 hours off the entire investigation.
He gave
them the account number for the shell company Diane had opened under the linen supplier's name. He gave them the transfer records. He gave them the login credentials for the hotel's Instagram account, which confirmed the backdated
posts.
And he told them in detail and in order everything he had done himself: the mail, the signature, the loan documents, the cognitive decline language he had written into the guarantor section because Diane had told him it would make the paperwork cleaner. "He's going to face charges," Pat said. "Mail theft is federal. The forgery is state. His cooperation will be considered, but it does not eliminate the charges that I know," I said. "ARR," Pat's voice went careful in the way it does when she is about to say something she has considered from multiple angles. "There is one more thing. I found it in the Reyes and Harmon subpoena records and I wanted to tell you myself before you heard it elsewhere." She slid a page across the desk. 6 years ago, approximately 3 weeks before the wedding, Nathan made a withdrawal from your personal savings account. The amount was $9,400. It was used to cover wedding costs that Diane's family had publicly committed to paying. I looked at the page, the date, the amount, the account number I had held for 30 years. He had access to the account because you had added him as an emergency contact 2 years prior, Pat said quietly. "He used that access once, and then the account was amended and the access was removed, and I don't believe you ever knew that I sat with that for a long moment 6 years ago. Before the hotel, before the PA, before any of it, Nathan had stood in the receiving line at his own wedding and shaken the hands of 200 guests and smiled for 400 photographs and let everyone believe his wife's family had been generous, and somewhere in the counting of that day was $9,400 he had taken from me without asking. It did not start when the hotel failed. It started before I walked him down the aisle." "Anything else?" I said. My voice came out steady. I was getting good at steady. "One thing," Pat said. "Diane contacted an immigration attorney in October of last year. She was exploring residency options in Mexico and Costa Rica. She never discussed this with Nathan. The inquiry predates the hotel's closure by 4 months. She was planning her exit before the hotel even closed. She had been building the plan and building the exit simultaneously, and Nathan had been inside one and completely unaware of the other. I drove home. Marge was in the kitchen. She had made soup, the kind she makes when something is wrong, thick and warm, and requiring no decisions from the person eating it. She set a bowl in front of me and sat down across the table and looked at me with those steady brown eyes and waited. I told her everything. The station, Diane's deflection, Nathan's 2 hours off cooperation, the charges both of them were facing. Then I told her about the $9,400. Margie's face did something complex and quiet. Her eyes filled, not spilling over, just filling the way a glass fills when you pour slowly and stop just before the edge. She pressed her lips together and breathed in through her nose and out through her mouth 3 times, the deliberate breathing of a woman facing something large with very precise tools. Then she reached across the table and put her hand over mine. We gave him everything we had, she said. Her voice was rough at the edges and entirely certain in the middle. That is not a mistake. What he did with what we gave him, that belongs to him, not to us. Why do not carry that? Did I know you're right, I said. But knowing doesn't stop it from hurting, she said. No, I said it doesn't. She squeezed my hand once hard. And then she stood up and refilled my bowl without asking whether I wanted more, because she has known for 38 years that I always want more when she makes the soup, but will not say so, and that is the kind of knowledge that only comes from choosing someone every single day for a very long time. Outside, the rain had stopped. The garden was soaked and gleaming, and the roses Marge had planted 3 summers ago along the back fence were bent low with water weight, heavy and still, and waiting for the sun. The consequences came the way consequences always come when the preparation has been thorough, steadily, in order, without drama. Diane was charged with first-degree forgery under Oregon Revised Statutes 165.013. 013 identity theft under 164.953 theft by deception, notary impersonation, and conspiracy. Her paralegal certification was suspended by the Oregon State Bar within 2 weeks of receiving Pat's referral, and permanently revoked 3 months after that. Reyes and Harmon terminated her employment the morning their attorney finished reading the subpoena. She did not return to the office. Her key card stopped working at 8:47 on a Tuesday, and that was the end of 6 years of a career she had used to build the tools that undid her. Gerald and Sharon Keene were charged with conspiracy and aiding and abetting. Sharon's fraudulent notary act, signing a log under a name she had legally held for 30 years, carried its own criminal exposure separate from her daughter's. Their attorney negotiated terms that kept them in Oregon pending resolution. They did not go to Portland. They did not go anywhere. Nathan pled to reduce charges in exchange for his cooperation. The federal mail theft charge carried the most weight, and the cooperation the most mitigation. His attorney worked the case for 4 months. At the end of it, Nathan had a criminal record, 2 years of probation, mandatory restitution, and a future that was going to require rebuilding from a foundation. He had spent 6 years quietly undermining the Copper Harbor Boutique. It was liquidated in October. The building went to creditors. The Instagram page went dark. The lobby lights that Nathan had been turning one very morning for 5 months stayed off, and after a while, the city put a notice on the door. And after a while longer, someone else bought the building and started over with it, which is what buildings do when the people inside them cannot. Tommy Briggs got his money back, most of it, from the frozen accounts. After several months of legal process, he called me once in September to apologize. I told him he had nothing to apologize for, and that I hoped the rest of his year was better than the first part of it. He sounded like a man who had learned something expensive and was still calculating the full cost.
Marge
had the locks changed on both houses the week after the search. Not because she thought anyone would come back, but because, as she explained to Thelick Smith with complete and cheerful practicality while I stood in the hallway listening, a woman should feel like her own front door means something. The locksmith agreed with her. I suspect most people agree with Marge when she explains things in that tone. November came. The garden went dormant.
Frank
started showing up on Tuesday evenings again with beer and opinions about things, which was the closest thing to a return to normal that our lives offered, and I found I was more grateful for it than I had words for. And then it was Thanksgiving. Nathan called 3 days before to ask if he could come. He did not ask to stay. He did not ask to be forgiven. He asked if I could come, which was a different and more honest question, and I told him
yes.
Frank arrived 2 hours early, uninvited, with a pecan pie he claimed Meadow have made himself, and that Marge immediately identified as coming from a bakery on Commercial Street. He did not deny it. He put the pie on the counter and sat at the kitchen table and said he wanted to be there, and that was all the explanation he offered, and none was required. Marge cooked. The house filled with the smell of it, the particular smell of a kitchen that has been used by the same 2 people for 38 years. layered and warm and completely specific to this house and no other. Nathan arrived at 4:15. He stood at the front door in a jacket I had not seen before, dark gray, knew the jacket of a man who has had to start rebuilding a wardrobe along with everything else. He was carrying a manila envelope thick, held flat in both hands, the way you carry something that matters. "Dad," he said. His voice was steady in the careful way that voices are steady when a person has been practicing steadiness. "Can I come in?" "Yes," I said, and I stepped aside. We sat at the kitchen table, the four of us, because Frank was there and Frank was staying and no one was suggesting otherwise. Marge brought out the good plates. Nathan set the envelope on the table between us and looked at it for a moment and then looked at me. "Dad, I had this prepared 3 weeks ago," he said. I kept finding reasons to wait. Pat told me to stop waiting. I opened the envelope. Inside was a notarized document properly executed, witnessed filed with the county in which Nathan Calloway voluntarily and permanently relinquished all claims to any inheritance property or financial asset belonging to Arthur James Calloway and Margaret Calloway, including but not limited to the properties at 1847 Creekide Drive and 412 Delmare Street. Behind it was a second document, a detailed repayment schedule covering the $9 for 100 from the wedding, the value of the ring, and the legal fees incurred in the course of the investigation. Monthly amounts, realistic ones, the kind of schedule a man makes when he intends to actually follow it. I read both documents completely. Then I set them down. "You used 6 years to take apart something that took 35 to build," I said. My voice came out even and quiet. "A piece of paper does not repair that." Nathan nodded. His jaw was tight, and his eyes were bright, and he was holding himself very still in the way that people hold themselves still when they are afraid that any movement will cause something to break. "I know," he said. "I'm not here to ask you to forget. I don't deserve that, and I'm not asking for it." He pressed his lips together for a moment. "I'm here because I want to start paying it back. Not just the money, I'll off it. And I know that's going to take longer than a repayment schedule. And I know you have no reason to believe me." His voice dropped lower, rougher, stripped down to something that had no performance left in it. "I just needed you to know that I know what I did, and that I'm not asking you to carry it for me anymore." The kitchen was very quiet. Marge reached across the table and picked up her fork and began eating, which was the most Marge thing she had ever done, and which meant in the language of 38 years of marriage that I understood completely that she had heard what needed to be heard, and had decided that dinner was also happening, and that both things could be true at the same time. Frank caught my eye across the table. He said nothing. He picked up his fork and I looked at my son. 35 years. The parking lot at Hoover Elementary, and the birthday cards, and the champagne on opening night. And all of it still there, unchanged by what had come after it, sitting beside the damage, the way Frank had said it would, heavier than the money and harder to put down. I picked up my fork. "Call ahead next time," I said. Nathan's breath came out in one short, sharp exhale. Not quite a laugh, not quite a sob. Something cracked and relieved and barely held together all at once. He nodded. He picked up his fork. We ate dinner. The four of us at the kitchen table on Creekside Drive, while the November dark came down outside, and the garden waited for spring, and the 2 houses that still had my name on them sat quiet on their streets, deed clean, nothing pending. It was not forgiveness, I want to be clear about that. Forgiveness, if it comes, will come later and slower, and will have to be earned in the way that things worth having are always earned through time and action, and the daily unremarkable work of being someone different than you were. What it was a door opened by the width of 3 words, not nothing. 6 months later, I still sit on the Creekside porch some evenings and think about what this cost and what it taught me. Here is what I know now. The people most capable of hurting you are the ones you never thought to protect yourself from. I trusted because I loved. That was not wrong. But love without verification is a door left open. I am not a man who prays often. But the night Detective Solis walked up that driveway, I understood what people mean when they say God places the right people in your path at the right moment. A bank manager, a neighbor with a camera, an attorney who never flinch. If your life has ever touched a family justice story, if you have watched someone you love become someone you do not recognize, hear me document everything. Verify quietly and never sign what you have not read. These are the revenge stories family members carry in silence for years. I carried mine for 18 months without knowing it. These revenge stories family situations produce are not always loud. Sometimes they end on a porch in the rain with 3 words and a door left open. If this story meant something to you, leave a comment. Share it with someone who needs it and subscribe. I will keep showing up. Thank you for staying until the very end. Note: some stories on this channel include fictional elements built for educational purposes. If that is not for you, no hard feelings. Find what fits you best and go toward